What if I told you that while the United States is busy picking fights with its own allies, China is quietly rolling out the red carpet for every single one of them? That right now, as we speak, world leaders are lining up in Beijing like it is the year 2001 all over again, when China joined the World Trade Organization and everyone wanted a piece of the action. But this time, the stakes are infinitely higher. This time, the entire global economic order is being reshaped before our eyes. And the man at the center of it all, President Xi Jinping, is playing a chess game that most people do not even realize has already begun. If that does not grab your attention, I do not know what will. Before we dive deep into this, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you are going to want to stay for this one because what is happening right now between the United States and China is going to affect your wallet, your job, and the future of every economy on this planet. Let us get into it. We are living through what many analysts are now calling one of those historical earthquake moments. Not because of a single headline, not because of one dramatic speech, but because of something far more structural. Something that, taken all together, paints a picture that is absolutely impossible to ignore. The world is returning to China, and the diplomatic foot traffic tells a striking story. Let us start with what just happened. The Munich Security Conference kicked off today, February 13th, 2026, and is already shaping up to be one of the most consequential gatherings in recent memory. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz opened the conference with a warning that sent shockwaves through the audience. He said that freedom is no longer a given and described the international order as being under destruction. He did not mince words. He looked directly at the situation with Washington and said that even the United States will come up against the limits of its powers if it decides to go it alone. And then he went further, suggesting that Washington's leadership role in the world is no longer unchallenged, and perhaps in his words, it has even been gambled away. Think about that for a second. The leader of Europe's largest economy, a country that has been one of America's most reliable allies for decades, is standing on a world stage and saying that the United States might have thrown away its leadership position. That is not coming from Beijing's propaganda machine, folks. That is coming from Berlin. And who else is at this conference? United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who arrived in Munich today and will address the audience tomorrow. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, representing Beijing. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. More than 60 heads of state and government from over 120 countries. And here is the detail that should make everyone pay attention. Rubio and Wang Yi already met today on the sidelines. They sat down, shook hands in front of American and Chinese flags. Neither spoke publicly, but the message was clear. Both Washington and Beijing know that what happens in the next few weeks could define the trajectory of global power for a generation. Now let me take you back to how we got here, because the build-up to this moment has been extraordinary. Since the start of 2026, a parade of world leaders has been making their way to Beijing. And these are not minor players. We are talking about the leaders of some of America's closest allies. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung kicked things off in January, becoming the first South Korean president to visit China since 2019. Then came Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, closing a nearly decade-long gap in leader-to-leader diplomacy between Ottawa and Beijing. Ireland's Prime Minister Michael Martin showed up next, the first Irish leader to visit China in 14 years. Finland's Prime Minister Petteri Orpo made the trip. And then, in a move that raised eyebrows across the Western world, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer arrived in Beijing for a 4-day visit, the first by a British Prime Minister in 8 years. Every single one of these leaders represents a country that is a treaty ally of the United States. Every single one of them has been hit by the Trump administration's tariffs. And every single one of them chose to fly to Beijing and sit down with Xi Jinping. If that does not tell you something about the current state of global affairs, I do not know what does. And Xi Jinping is playing this masterfully. During his meeting with Starmer, she said that unilateralism, protectionism, and power politics have been rampant, severely impacting the international order. He urged major economic powers to take the lead in implementing international laws, warning that otherwise, and I want you to hear this carefully, the world will regress to what he called a jungle-like existence. Now, whether you agree with Xi Jinping's politics or not, you have to admit that is a powerful statement coming from the leader of the world's second-largest economy at a time when the traditional global leader, the United States, is busy threatening tariffs on its own friends. But let us talk about the man who is arguably driving all of this. President Donald Trump. Since taking office for his second term, Trump has wielded tariffs not just against China, but against a whole list of American trading partners. He has ramped up efforts to increase American influence over Venezuela and Iran. He threatened to take over Greenland, which is a semi-autonomous territory of Denmark, a NATO ally. He even threatened new tariffs on 8 European countries that he said were standing in his way on the Greenland issue. And here is where it gets really interesting. At last year's Munich Security Conference, Vice President J.D. Vance showed up and essentially lectured European leaders about the state of democracy on their own continent. Diplomats who were there described it as a watershed moment, a complete break from the tradition of the conference, which has historically been a celebration of the transatlantic alliance. The fallout from that speech reverberated through every European capital for months. This year, with Rubio leading the delegation instead of Vance, the expectation is a slightly more diplomatic approach. Before leaving for Munich, Rubio told reporters that the United States is very tightly linked with Europe and that most Americans can trace their cultural or personal heritage back to the continent. But then he added something that reveals the core tension. He said, and these words matter, the old world is gone. We live in a new era in geopolitics and is going to require all of us to re-examine what that looks like. So on one hand you have Washington saying the old world is gone and everything needs to change. And on the other hand you have Beijing saying come to us. We are the stable partner. We believe in multilateralism and free trade. You do not have to be a geopolitical expert to see which message is more appealing to countries that are feeling bruised and uncertain about their relationship with Washington. Now, let us talk about the elephant in the room. Trump's planned visit to Beijing in April. This is shaping up to be the most consequential diplomatic event of 2026. And the buildup has been intense. Just last week, Trump and Xi had their first phone call since November. Trump called it excellent and very positive. He said they discussed trade, Taiwan, the military, and the upcoming trip. He even said the relationship with China and his personal relationship with Xi is an extremely good one. But do not let the warm words fool you. Underneath the pleasantries, there is a brutal power struggle going on. The two leaders originally agreed to this meeting when they sat down in Busan, South Korea back in October 2025, where they struck a fragile trade truce. Trump rated the outcomes a 12 on a scale of 10, which tells you a lot about his negotiating style. Under that deal, the United States agreed to lower tariffs on Chinese goods that were imposed over the fentanyl crisis from 20% down to 10%, and to suspend higher reciprocal tariffs for 1 year. China agreed to resume purchases of American soybeans, committing to 12 million metric tons for the current season and 25 million tons annually for 3 years, though that is still less than the 34 million metric tons that were being exported under the Phase 1 trade agreement. China also agreed to temporarily ease its export controls on rare earth minerals and critical materials like gallium, germanium, antimony, and graphite. But notice that word, temporarily. China suspended its export control measures for just 1 year and changed the licensing review policy from a presumption of denial to standard review. Exporting these materials to the United States still requires a license. But here is what most people miss. These are not permanent solutions. These are temporary pauses. The underlying tariff rate on Chinese imports to the United States is still sitting at around 47%. The technology restrictions are still in place. The strategic competition has not gone away. Both sides are essentially buying time, and China is using that time brilliantly. Here is what the smart money is watching. Analysts expect a signing ceremony during Trump's April visit for a deal covering as many as 500 Boeing aircraft. That would be the headline victory that Trump needs. In exchange, there is talk that Trump could remove the remaining 10% fentanyl-related tariffs on Chinese exports during or shortly after the meeting. But behind that headline, China is pressing hard on Taiwan arms sales and using Trump's transactional mindset to its advantage. One analyst at Evercore put it perfectly when he said that Trump's transaction-oriented approach should be a gift to Beijing compared to an ideology-driven strategy reinforced by coalition building. Beijing's broader strategy right now can be summed up in one quote that an analyst shared recently. Never interrupt your adversary when he is making a mistake. While Trump alienates traditional American allies with tariff threats and aggressive foreign policy moves, China is positioning itself as the reasonable alternative. Beijing has been portraying itself not only as a partner for developing countries in the global south, but also as a stabilizing force for the entire world. And here is the genius of it. China does not even have to do that much. All Beijing has to do is point at what Washington is doing and say, look, we are not doing that. We believe in restraint, multilateralism, free trade, and win-win cooperation. Whether that is sincere or not is almost beside the point. The contrast sells itself. The numbers back this up. The Canada-China trade deal that Carney struck during his Beijing visit is a perfect example. Under that agreement, Ottawa would roll back 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, while Beijing would lift retaliatory tariffs on Canadian canola seeds. Trump was furious. He warned he would impose a 100% tariff on Canadian goods if Ottawa moved forward with the deal. But Carney went ahead anyway. And at Davos in January, Carney delivered a speech that many commentators are already calling potentially historic. He declared that there had been a rupture in the world order, a clear reference to the Trump administration's approach to global affairs. And it was not just Carney. Chinese analysts picked up on it immediately. One researcher from Tianjin University of Commerce said that tensions between the United States and Europe are good for China's relationship with the European bloc. He said the Greenland controversy could accelerate Western acceptance that competition with China is failing and reinforce the idea that global power is shifting eastward. Another professor from Renmin University pointed out that countries maintaining distance from the United States indicates that these nations value ties with China's large economy. Now, let me be clear about something. China is not without its problems. Despite all this diplomatic charm offensive, there are real frictions underneath the surface. The European Union still has deep institutional mistrust of Beijing. There are unresolved disputes over industrial overcapacity. There are recriminations over China's alignment with Russia. And just this week, Trump and Xi had a phone call where Beijing singled out Taiwan as the most important issue in bilateral relations, urging the United States to handle arms sales to Taiwan with prudence. Washington approved arms sales to Taiwan worth as much as $11.15 billion in December, one of the biggest packages ever. So the fundamental tensions are very much alive. And then there is the Xi-Putin connection. On the very same day that Trump called Xi, the Chinese president had held a video conference with Russian President Vladimir Putin. According to the official readouts, Xi and Putin appeared to be projecting a strong, united front. Moscow described their bilateral relations as an important stabilizing factor at a time of growing global turmoil. They discussed Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, and the broader geopolitical landscape. The optics of that timing were impossible to miss. She talked to Putin about global strategy, and then hours later picked up the phone with Trump to talk about trade and soybeans. Here is what I think is really happening, and this is the part that I think most media outlets are not connecting. We are witnessing a fundamental restructuring of the global order. It is not happening through a dramatic war or a sudden collapse. It is happening through diplomacy, through trade deals, through the slow accumulation of bilateral relationships that are gradually shifting the center of gravity away from Washington and toward Beijing. China is hosting the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum this year. The senior officials meeting is happening next month in Guangzhou, with the main economic leaders meeting set for later in the year. This gives Beijing yet another platform to showcase itself as the convener of global dialogue. Add in Trump's April visit, and you have a situation where Xi Jinping will have hosted America's allies, America's competitors, and then the American president himself, all within the span of a few months. In Beijing's telling, the Middle Kingdom is back. But substance matters more than symbolism. And this is where things could go either way. Back in 2017, Xi Jinping traveled to Davos and delivered a celebrated defense of free trade and globalization. China was briefly cast as the alternative, a safe haven from Trump 1.0. But then Beijing failed to live up to that promise. Instead, they ushered in the era of wolf warrior diplomacy, aggressive posturing that turned off many potential partners. It is entirely possible that China could squander this moment as well. The question for 2026 is whether Beijing has learned from that mistake. The early signs are mixed. On one hand, the diplomatic engagement is broader and deeper than it was in 2017. The business delegations accompanying visiting leaders are larger. The deals being struck are more concrete. And there is a domestic political dimension that is driving this too. The 21st National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party is set to convene late next year, which will approve a new central committee and an expected fourth term for Xi Jinping as General Secretary. In 2026, Xi needs to consolidate his political power and show substantive progress in implementing key aspects of the 15th Five-Year Plan, a national economic blueprint for 2026 through 2030 that will be officially released in March. So, Xi does not just want this diplomatic success, he needs it. He needs to show the Chinese people and the party that his leadership is delivering results on the global stage. On the other hand, the structural problems in China's economy have not gone away. The property market crisis, the demographic challenges, the youth unemployment issue, the debt overhang in local governments. These are real problems that no amount of diplomatic photo opportunities can solve. And let us not forget the American side of this equation. Trump's approach, what some analysts are calling friction without competition, is creating aggravation in bilateral tensions without actually organizing the American government for genuine strategic competition with China. The tariffs are hurting American consumers. The technology restrictions are pushing China to accelerate its own development. And the alienation of allies is handing Beijing opportunities that China's diplomats could never have created on their own. The Atlantic Council summed up perfectly when they noted that Beijing's tight grip on rare earth exports revealed the depth of American industrial vulnerability in a globalized economy. China controls the processing of rare earth minerals that are essential for everything from smartphones to fighter jets. The temporary suspension of export controls is just that, temporary. And when that suspension expires, the United States will likely not have done enough to reduce its dependence on Chinese supply chains. So where does this leave us? We are at a genuine inflection point. The first quarter of 2026 is shaping up to be one of those periods that historians will look back on and say, that is when things started to change. The Munich Security Conference, happening right now, is a microcosm of the broader dynamics at play. You have European leaders trying to figure out their relationship with a mercurial Washington. You have China's top diplomats sitting in the same room, ready to offer an alternative. You have the specter of Trump's April visit to Beijing hanging over everything. The global economy is on the move. The question is not whether the international order is changing. It is. The question is whether anyone in Washington is paying attention to where it is going. Because right now, all roads seem to lead to Beijing. And Xi Jinping is not just waiting at the finish line. He is the one drawing the map. This is going to be one of the most consequential years in modern geopolitics, folks. The decisions being made right now in Munich, in Beijing, in Washington, these are going to shape the world that your children and grandchildren inherit. We need to pay attention. We need to understand what is happening. And we need to talk about it. If you found this analysis valuable, please hit that like button. It really helps this channel reach more people who care about these issues. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you never miss an update. We are going to keep tracking this story as it develops because this is far from over. The April summit between Trump and Xi could change everything. And you are going to want to be here when it happens. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and I will see you in the next one.